Welcome to Wandering Jews, a J-Square Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
And I'm Sorel.
None of us are generals or politicians or analysts or pundits. All of us are Jews, Israelis, and educators. All of us have been injured and impacted by the last year of war, by the Hamas invasion of the kibbutzim and moshavim, of the towns and the villages of the Western Negev on Saturday, October 7th, 2023. Hamas terrorists murdered over 1,300 people and took hostage over 230 others. Evidence collected from the invasion sites, eyewitness accounts of the survivors, and video collected and distributed by the Hamas reveals a brutal campaign of extreme violence, including torture, sexual abuse and rape, mutilation of both the living and the dead. Professor Jonathan Sarna of Brandeis University, a distinguished historian of the Jewish people and the American Jewish story, remarked following October 7th, he shared in a talk in February 2024 that one had to go back to Russia in March of 1881 when Alexander II was assassinated to find a single day that had so punctuated long-standing Jewish hopes and assumptions about political change and our place in the world. Quote, "We thought the mass murder, rape, and kidnapping of innocent Jews, which is something many of us remember hearing about in Russian pogroms, was all in the past." Well, that myth of security, I think, was shattered on October 7th. And that's particularly true in Israel, although for different reasons, I think it's true in other respects here in the United States. End quote. 1 year since October 7th, the Israel-Hamas war continues. Israel is in fact facing a multi-front war. Based on the ongoing threat of the Iranian-backed Hezbollah on our northern border, nearly 150,000 Israelis have been displaced from their homes in Israel's north. Residents of the Western Negev are beginning to return home, even as the war continues, and with the nagging question, is it safe to return home to places like Kfar Aza, Netiv HaSara, and Kibbutz Be'eri? 1 year since October 7th, close to 100 Israelis remain in captivity by the Hamas in Gaza. No one knows for sure how many of the nearly 100 are still alive and how many will eventually be brought home, hopefully living to their families, and how many will be brought home as corpses for burial. For us as educators and guides, we've dedicated our lives to telling Israel's story. What does it mean to welcome groups and share 365 days since October 7th? We do not intend, nor can we answer all the questions and provide ironclad answers. We do intend to share the only things that educators can share in this horrible, ongoing situation: a readiness to listen, an attempt to comfort, and a reminder that words like solidarity and hope can still have meaning in October 2024.
Typically, solidarity missions, when you think about the concept of a solidarity mission, we think about it as occurring in the aftermath, when the war is over and people come to show their support. This episode is dedicated to the during math. While the dust is still far from settled, emotions are raw and the war continues. We approach this conversation, this episode, with heavy hearts, but also with a deep sense of responsibility to honor the resilience, pain, and solidarity that have emerged during these difficult, traumatic times. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with two of our extraordinary expert educators, Lior Hochberg and Doron Wilfand, who have led some of these J-Squared missions through the most sensitive and challenging moments. They're going to share with us how they've navigated the immense responsibility of offering participants a space to both give and receive comfort, all while managing their own personal experiences as Israelis themselves living during this war. I want to welcome both Doron and Lior, two of our J-Squared team. I'd like to begin by inviting both of them to share a little bit of their backgrounds and where you are 1 year after October the 7th, 2023.
Hello, everyone, and So as being an educator, I'm going to say and share a few words about myself. I was born and raised in Israel in the year of 1983. So I never been through like massive, big wars throughout my life and my life experience. A year ago, I married and I have two children, and we moved to a kibbutz, kibbutz Bet Govrin, which is not far away from Hebron, not far away from, let's say, southwest of Jerusalem.
Those people who have been out to the Dig for a Day program with J Squared Adventures
Definitely
have seen the kibbutz as they go into the archaeological site.
Very much. So I live across a very ancient part of our history, and we are the top level of that man-made hill, living our life in the kibbutz. And about a year ago, which was in August, I moved to live in Bet Govrin with both of my kids. On October 7, we were there, and we will talk more about the experience of being in Israel on October 7, but I can tell you that two things really motivate me or gave me the power to continue the days after, and one of them was the fact that I had children and I have to wake up and play soccer with them on the green grass of the kibbutz. And the second thing was my work, my job, my profession. We brought groups here and we needed to be present. We needed to be there for them and for us. And I moved from the being to the doing, and from meeting the groups and be out on the field and hear the stories. For me, to be able to bear witness for what happened there was a very meaningful and a very helpful way of, I won't say moving on, I would say to continue.
Hi, my name is Doron, and I basically grew up in two main places. One was Kibbutz Ein HaShofet, which is the first American kibbutz in Israel. And the second is Chicago and Skokie. And that combination has kind of shaped who I was. Really from a very young age, I was involved in all kinds of forms of informal Jewish education. And as I kind of began my career as a tour guide about 25 years ago, at the same time I was starting my undergrad studies. And basically throughout my professional life, I was trying to combine being a scholar, which I wasn't that great at, and being a tour guide, which was just a little bit better. And it was a better way to provide for a family that eventually got to 4 kids. And since my wife is already a scholar and a much, much better scholar than I am, I decided to focus on being a tour educator. Now, when we connect this to October 7th, I was actually doing my favorite thing. On October 7th, I was running on a hill when I saw the first rockets and heard the sirens. And very quickly, it became very, very personal for us. My 20-year-old Ariel is a regular soldier. He's a combat medic in the Combat Engineering Corps. And he's been in Gaza for the last 11 months. In fact, right now, he's very, very deep into Gaza. We won't go into too many details. My oldest son, David, was in the reserves for more than 2 months, but he wasn't in Gaza itself. He was very, very close to Gaza, but not there. Some of the closest friends of my parents, especially of my late father, more than 10 were being held in Gaza. Unfortunately, only 2 of them are still alive, or we hope that they're alive. We're praying. And many of their other friends were murdered, especially in Kibbutz Nir Oz, which has a very strong connection to our kibbutz. And really from the first moment that the war began, we've been trying to do 3 main things. One is to stay sane and function for the sake of our younger kids, 15 and 12-year-olds. The second is to do as much as we can to bring the hostages back. And that really is almost from day one, demonstrating, rallying, my daughter sewing for the return of the hostages, really trying to be there for families that we know. And the third thing was surviving economically, which has also become very difficult. And if it wasn't for these missions, for the solidarity groups, we probably, or I wouldn't have had any income at all. So in that sense, it's also something that really helps me cope with the situation, but it's also something very, very essential for us economically.
Thank you both for sharing. So, both of you talked about your experience the last year and how you were able to lean into solidarity missions as a coping mechanism yourself. When you think about your work, with over the 90 J-Squared Adventure Solidarity missions over the last year. Which aspects of Solidarity missions spoke to you, and to what extent do you see yourself as guides and educators, as witnesses? What does witnessing mean for you?
So that's a really important and great question, because I think that being an educator is, and when we work as a team, that's one of the first questions we brought up. What's the meaning of what we're doing right now? What do we want to gang out of it? What type of picture we want to paint? And I think that there is a balance between being authentic and let people go through what is there, and also take responsibility over the things that they've seen and hearing. We don't want to send people back home with post-trauma, that's for sure. And I think that that's a balance that we try to think about. There is a level of how much you can design it, if at all, right? And I felt that when we talked about the terminology of being bear witness, and not just to, in a way, peek into someone's yard, because we went into kibbutzim that atrocities happen in their backyards, and you want to make sure that you are respecting the place, which became kind of an holy place. This is a place where people lost their life. People are still fighting in a battle a mile away from where you are on the safety of our life. So there is a very important, like, as I said, responsibility to how to do it. And I felt that the meaning of to be bear witness is to, first of all, and I brought it up with the groups, what does it mean? It's an open question, of course, that you hear, to see, to witness, to experience, to hear the stories, to definitely give a hug and get a hug. This mutual hug was very important, and we saw it. And also the fact that you're taking that back with you, which means it's not just a picture that is going to sit in your gallery in your phone. It's something that you're going to maybe put a post on it on Facebook. You're maybe going to talk with your friends and your neighbors, people that cannot board a plane and come here. And even the decision to board a plane and come here in such a time, this is a lot of courage needed. And we never know what to expect when you arrive in such a place. And I want to say just one more thing. I choose my profession because I love history. And I love working with people. And we usually celebrate with them the best time of their life. They come here to experience their history, the festivity of Jerusalem, the holiness of the places. And suddenly I need to walk with them in a battlefield, which is still bleeding. This is not what I aim to, but me as an educator, definitely there is a lot of space there to work. And I felt that there is no that shield of time. When I talk about the destruction of the Second Temple, I can talk about it in a place when I know what is now. I know there is Israel. I know I have my kids. I know I can touch that wall, and I have the security around me that will be offering like that balance and security. So that was a challenge, and I think that it's an open conversation. What's the meaning of guiding solidarity missions when you are still walking through time, when we don't know what will be the last chord of that symphony? It's a very beautiful way of describing a war, but it's like really, and still going on war, and that shield of time was not there. So I felt I'm walking with the groups, I'm experiencing what they're experiencing in a way that I'm with them. We're experiencing that together. So that solidarity, that bearing witness, for me, it's exactly that, to be there and to try and bring it to the future and see what we can do to maybe help improve. It's not just, again, as I say, a photo in a gallery. That's for me.
So a lot of what Lior, what you spoke about really resonates very strongly with me. I want to add that for me, I never felt in this war that I'm bearing witness. I'm actually a participant. Now, it's not like, I grew up in a youth movement called the Shomer HaTzair. In the Shomer HaTzair, they always used to say, we decided at some point to not study history, but to make it. But here I didn't decide anything. I'm an unwilling participant in a horrible tragedy. Our lives were ripped apart, like literally. In that sense, I told you about the people that I know, and it was the tip of the iceberg. We know a lot more, and it's all the circles of the kids, and, when you have children of a certain age and parents of a certain age. It was those two groups were hit maybe the hardest, especially when it comes to kibbutzim. And it was also the personal pain about the kibbutzim, about something that I still believe very strongly and was raised in. And it's in our age group, you knew everyone that was in your age group in all of the kibbutzim in Israel, and especially kibbutzim like Nir Oz, because we were with them in seminars and hikes. We had girlfriends or new girlfriends of people. So everything there is entwined with these personal memories. And then you come there with a group. And the first time I was with a group, I think it was January of 24. So this was very, very fresh, very new, The fighting in northern Gaza was still very, very heavy. It was a time when my son has been maybe home once since the beginning of the war. It was a time of great anxiety that is almost impossible to describe. When you can barely fall asleep, and then when you fall asleep, your ultimate nightmare is that you're going to be woken up by a knock on the door announcing that something, God forbid, happened to him. And we would actually instruct our other kids who were older that if they come home, they always have a key with them. They should never knock. Absolutely not, because sometimes even the noise of someone going up the stairs. Now, with all of that happening, I was guiding a group with a rabbi that I've guided many times before, a very, very, very charismatic, knowledgeable, a true leader. And this was the fourth time he came with a group to Israel. The first time he came alone. So he, in a way, knew more about what was going on than I was.
Fourth time since October 7th.
Fourth time since October 7th. He was basically almost moved here. It was very important for him to bring people. And he had very powerful messages that he wanted to give. And I was kind of torn apart between my feeling as like a professional tour educator to do things and lead the group. So I was kind of trying to juggle these two needs. And at certain times, I really felt like my group was like a group dynamics therapy session. And sometimes I had to step back and say, okay, this is not all about you. And yes, it's great that you're sharing things about, especially, it was all about my son who was in the army. But, they also need to hear other things. They also came here for other reasons. And sometimes I felt it was just exactly the right thing.
Right.
And maybe the most emotional part of that group was that this guy was unbelievably connected to people in the IDF, in the Israeli military. So we were able to go into Nachal Oz base, which is right on the border. It's actually the wall protecting the base, or the outpost is the wall between Israel and Gaza. And the soldiers were so accommodating, in my opinion, as like someone as a former paratrooper or something like that, was maybe too accommodating. I said, okay, maybe this is not 100% safe. What are we doing? And maybe we shouldn't be here at all because these soldiers are being distracted by us. But at a certain point, they actually let some of the people in the group go up to watchtowers looking into Gaza. It was like, and you hear the booms and the ground was shaking. This was very heavy fighting. So I started talking to the reservists, to the soldiers that were there, and I started to talk about them. I realized that we were both in the same unit in the regular army, so we got to talk about that. And then they said, just earlier this morning, people went into Sajaiya, which is a very infamous Gaza neighborhood, for an operation. And I realized it was my son that went in, that he went in through there. So that's the kind of experiences I went through with the groups. And if I was someone who was a little cynical about solidarity missions and doing a war, that ended my cynicism right there and then. I felt that these people were not only coming to be with us, they were in a way coming to be our support group. Lior said a hug, but not only a hug, a kind of someone that we can fall on and even cry with. And that was very, very powerful. And just to wrap that up, I would say that at the end of this group, it was the first time during the war that I was a little optimistic. I wasn't optimistic necessarily about Israel, but I was optimistic about this idea of at least a certain part of the Jewish people that has a very, very strong bond with us. But it's not just blind support. It actually is something that we can maybe call love, that comes out of seeing of how fragile we are and how problematic, but also still supporting us no matter what.
Wow, that's really powerful.
And if I can add something, Doron, for what you just said, I don't know if it's a similar experience, but when we were at the Nova festival site at Re'im, we were standing there and the group gathered together into a circle to sing a song and to kind of do kind of a ceremony or a ritual that will bring everybody together. And many people come to visit that site these days from different reasons. Some of them are coming to see the place. Some people come maybe from curiosity because it's all open. It's on the main road. You can just go in. It's not a military zone anymore. It was in the early days, but now it's open for everybody. And soldiers were passing by and we were thinking they're probably protecting the area. But one of the soldiers actually stepped forward and came closer to the group. And he said, I'm going to Gaza tomorrow. And he shared with the group how important for him a moment before going to Gaza to see people from United States, American Jews, coming to stand to bear witness for what happened here. And it was an amazing moment that you cannot design in any way. Just like you're describing being in Nahal Oz base and standing there and you hear the noise in the background. So that's something about boarding again a plane and get off the plane and see things through your own eyes that change things, that makes everything more personal. And I think that that's something that we all experience. I gave a hug to that soldier because I felt that it was so important for him to come and pay that respect for the people. He's going to fight tomorrow, but for him, they are on the battlefield with him. That's what he felt. That's what he gave us to feel. I have a small record of his voice sharing the words that he shared with the group, so we will play it on the podcast so people can hear. So I just wanted to share those things that you cannot describe only if you see it through your own eyes.
And we came here today to see what happened to our brothers and sisters. Most of us lost friends, lost family on this day. And for us to see your support, we just came here like by the way and we saw you, and all of us came very emotional for your beautiful ceremony. And we want to thank you as Jews before we are Israelis, because for us, we always look at you like you live in a safe haven. But now we understand there is no safe haven for us, nowhere on earth. So we are for you, and who knows what the future is going to bring to you guys, but you need to stay strong abroad for yourself and for us, and we are together in the same boat.
The two of you talked about a number of issues that come to mind. And you shared, I think, a lot of your own hearts. And hopefully that's also what education is about when it's doing what it needs to do. A lot of pain, a lot of worry, a lot of concern, a strong sense that there's a difficulty here, which, among other things, is connected with the enormity, with the tragedy, and with the presence of the events. We're not talking about something that happened 500 years ago or 2,000 years ago. And each one of you also touched on this issue of security in the psychological sense, of hope, of witness, of trust. And I want to ask you to a little bit try to amplify when you're with groups, and as now we're going to be with groups again during the course of the year. If we've hosted some 90 groups at J Squared Adventures during the course of the past year, we'll be hosting others for the upcoming year. Where do you see that hope? Where does the light get in, as Leonard Cohen says in his song Anthem? We're still in the middle. We still have hostages. We still have people on the battlefield. There are still funerals going on. There's a civilian population in Gaza who is suffering as well because of this war. Where is there hope? Where does the light get in?
Yeah, that's sometimes a very difficult question to answer in these days. And, with conversations, especially with my wife, who, for some reasons, as a university professor, actually has more work than she's ever had in her life. It's an interesting phenomenon. There are more students, and the students are facing great difficulties, and she, in a way, is earning for two people because my work was impacted. And we sometimes have these conversations, especially at night, when she's just saying, what's, like, where are we going? What's the future for this country? And one of the things that helps me is perspective. And being kind of the son of an amateur historian, the grandson of someone who studied, was a professor for political science, and someone who himself was trying to be a scholar of history, again, not maybe so successfully, sometimes perspective really helps. And you look at other times that were difficult times, and I'm not saying necessarily that they were more difficult than this time. I'm not sure, actually. Maybe in the beginning of the war, I could have said, yes, it was harder in 48. Now, actually, talking to some military historians sometimes, like my father-in-law, who's kind of a military historian, among other things. Actually, soldiers spent less time in the front in the War of Independence, because in the War of Independence, there were 2 long ceasefires in the middle. One of them was 4 months. So there was never a point in history in which young soldiers were so long fighting. But in any case, I would say that when I visit the Western Negev, as we like to call it, in the kibbutz movement, I actually do it in 3 different kind of occasions. One, which is the most depressing and maybe the saddest, are funerals. I've been to 3 so far. Of people who we presumed were hostages, life hostages, and ended up being dead. The second is also very difficult. It's when I usually take my son to the place from which they take him into Gaza, or more optimistic, bring him home, which I would do, any time of day. Doesn't matter what. If it would be 3 a.m. on a Friday, just get the car.
When he's on leave from the army.
Because, sometimes they say, okay, you can go out right now, but please have a ride or something, because we don't want to leave you in the middle of nowhere at like 3 a.m. So I come, sometimes he has a cousin who comes and picks him up, but usually it's me. And the third occasion is with groups. So actually, with me, the times with the groups are the most positive experiences, and the experiences that do give me hope when I visit these places, because where the other times I visit these places, I'm either feeling like I am letting my son go, and sometimes you just want to say, okay, let's break down the car, or let's just go back home, and, the army can deal with it, and that's it. You've been in there long enough. We can't take it anymore. Maybe you can take it. Big question mark if you can. But we can't. We just can't. And obviously, when it's a funeral, it's heartbreaking, even though there were very, very meaningful, and some say you could say beautiful funerals in Kibbutz Nir Oz. So when I come with the groups, there is a feeling, at least sometimes, of hope. And it comes through maybe 3 different things. The first is that it does give me perspective, because when I describe this, I compare it in my mind to other situations. And I say, okay, we came out of these situations in the past. We're going to come out as well.
Historical situations.
Historical situations, yes, preceding October 7th. The second thing that gives me optimism is being able to see it through the eyes of the participants. Some of them in these missions, sometimes not always the case, but they tend to be older than I am. I'm in my 50s, and sometimes we have people in their 70s and even in their 80s. And that generation is sometimes tougher. It's tougher in some negative senses, but also in some very positive senses. They have a sense of history. And they know what it is when you don't have a country at all, or when you don't have any power, or when you feel helpless. And they say, okay, son, we came out of it. And they tell you a story, and you say, okay, they know what they're talking about. And that gives you power. And the other sense of optimism that I get from the groups is the togetherness, being able to share with almost no judgment and with almost a sense of love. I said it before, and I feel that it's very strong. And in that sense, I just want to share a story. And that was with a group that was the least supportive group of Israel that I maybe ever guided, but certainly after October 7th. They're not people that hate Israel. Certainly not, but they are people that have a very strong sense that a lot of what Israel is doing is wrong, which sometimes I agreed with and sometimes I didn't. But their starting point was very, very, very critical of Israel. And there were only 3 people. And we had a very, very, very profound experience throughout that whole day. I was just with them for 1 day, and we shared a lot of stories and a lot of things they shared with me and I shared with them. Some of them have been to Gaza on their own. One of them even once a year for 10 years in a row. So they knew what they were talking about. And we had a very meaningful day. And maybe the most powerful and also somewhat traumatic part of the day was that we were in Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which is very, very close to the border. And as we were, and as our host took us into a safe room in which one of her friends was murdered with her son, a very obviously emotional place and very difficult experience for all of us. As we were coming out of it, but we were already too far away from the safe room and too far away from any shelter, we heard the very famous today alert that you hear in all of Israel, but it's especially, scary and even terrifying so close to the Gaza border. And when we heard the alert, like about 3 seconds passed and we heard a boom.
You heard the siren.
Like we heard the siren and the boom almost simultaneously. And we knew instinctively that even though they only got that instruction, they never experienced it in their lives, we knew what to do. And we told them beforehand what would happen if there is a siren. But they did it instinctively, and so did we, me and the host. And the 5 of us were lying on the ground in an area which had like right between ruins of houses on both sides, the place that was most impacted in Kfar Aza by October 7th. And as we were lying there on the ground, you're supposed to do it for 10 minutes. I have to say we cheated. We did it only for 3 or 4 minutes because the conditions were so difficult and we were worried that maybe there's another siren. So we wanted to be maybe closer to a bomb shelter this time. And in those minutes, some of us prayed. I heard it. And we were very close. We almost touched. Our heads almost touched. And when we came up together, the first thing that our host said, and I was agreeing with her, said, okay, if you want to end this right now and get back on the bus and go back to Tel Aviv, I will completely understand, you know? And they said, no, absolutely. We have to continue. We can't finish now on this note. And yes, we understood and we had a lot of empathy to what you were going through before. But now we felt that fear, that knowledge that, and we're taking this with us. So in that some sense, this very scary and almost traumatic experience kind of brought us together. And what I liked about that was not the fact that they said, okay, now we agree with everything that Israel is doing. No, they said, we are still very critical. We still think that there are a lot of things that need to be done and also to protect Palestinian lives and a lot of other things. But we understand at the core that there are many, many angles to this story and many parts. And we feel the same kind of empathy that we feel for the Palestinians in Gaza, also for the people, especially in the Western Negev, but also in all of Israel.
I will just add for what you just said, Doron, that I think that our profession, being tour guides, educators, it's filling us up with hope. And I wish every day that I can take my parents and my in-laws, just to bring them to see what we're seeing. Because the fact that we are there on the first line of it, and we are hearing the stories and we see those things in front of our eyes, filling us up with hope. I was kind of thinking about those small lights that I've seen throughout the solidarity missions that I guided, and there are so many, and it's hard to pick one or two, but I would say in that specific place where the most horrible times happen, the atrocities happen, this is where you see the people walking around with resilience. And I'm going to give one example that I want to share. We went to Ofakim, which is where people most heard about a woman named Rachel that was with her husband in her home, was actually in hostages held by Hamas terrorists for many hours, and she made cookies and she gave them the cookies. And then eventually she's saved. But Ofakim is a small town that has a lot of culinary, very good food from North Africa, usually Jews that came from North Africa, and people go to Ofakim to eat. This is something you do. But the story is that one parallel street to that neighborhood, there was another woman that used to have a business in her home for many years to host groups in her home. And now Ofakim, it's very close to what happened. And that October 7 actually ended up getting to the streets of Ofakim, and terrorists were all around. And now her business is completely closed. So one of our groups, and we were many, there was a big group, came to Ofakim, to her home, and she hosted us on 3 long tables filled with food. This is, of course, post-October 7. And she's standing there, and she put music, and she danced in the living room. And she sharing her story with a lot of pain, but on the other hand, she gave the group such an amazing experience with the food that she made on the table. And optimism, she was so optimistic. She said, you continue to come, and we will be here. To see the people that are not just talking about it, they were there on the same day. It happened on their streets. There was a part of a missile that dropped, fell down right outside of the door. She showed us the small crater that it created outside of her home. And you say, if she is able to cook food for so many people and to share her story and put music in the background, the group left they were on a high, you can't express it.
So inspiring.
So inspiring, exactly. So those are the things that bring me hope, and our work as educators bring us to those places. And I wish it was more on TV screen to see the resilience of our people.
And they can take that home to their communities as an example of resilience and inspiration and draw comfort from it themselves.
Exactly.
When we talk about the groups who've come, and again, some 90 groups and people who will continue to come, I think it's really amazing, the sense of togetherness. We talk about different slogans of Jewish peoplehood, solidarity. In Hebrew, we say Klal Yisrael. And sometimes you feel like it's okay, we live in 2 very different places. We're living very different lives. How really together are we? I think one of the things that have come out from this conversation and that I felt myself this year very much in meeting with the groups, whether it was here in Israel or in Europe, a different kind of experience, was that sense that it's not just a slogan. That particularly right now, people are really looking to be together, to share, to, if you want to use the term, to bear witness, and to take that home and ask themselves, what can I do beyond the being here and being together? And how do I continue that as I take it home? One of the things that's also true, I think, about all of us is that part of that bearing of witness is the sense of standing on the shoulders of people who came before us. So I know, like, I'll be in a certain place with a group or even many times by myself, and all of a sudden a text will fall on my head that I remember from the prophets of Israel, a Talmudic story, a verse from a particular novel or a poem. And what can we say? We're addicted to these stories. And my addiction also includes one of Israel's great poets, and that's Chaim Guri, veteran of the 1948 Independence War. Doron mentioned the 1948 war. Chaim Guri, who was all throughout his years someone who sang the songs of Israel, like so many of his generation. And there's one poem in particular, maybe it's because it rained this morning as I was driving into the studio, just a little bit, but just a little bit, beginning of hopefully a winter that will bring some additional measure of healing to all of us. And so I did want to finish by sharing this particular poem by Chaim Guri. The poem is called in Hebrew, Ani Mivakesh Mina Choref. I ask from the winter. I ask from the winter to wake me with lightning and thunder, to shake me up and polish my soul and cleanse all hearts. I call on strong winds to come and rattle our streets and rock trees laden with heavy branches and whip flags and frenzied laundry. I call on the wind to come from the world's four corners to remind us of who we are and what is our finest hour. I always feel obliged to at least read one line in the Hebrew, in the original Hebrew, when we talk about our story and where our story comes from and our connections to the past and the living present. The Hebrew language is also part of that. Ani koreh l'ruach shetavo mi-arba ruchot lahazkirenu mi anachnu v'mahi shatenu hayafa.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Sorel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.